warming is, yes. We've got a note in here that the recording is in progress, so the thing will be recorded. But climate change, climate warming, it's a real thing. It's only going to get worse if we don't take a part in trying to reduce the impacts. So tonight begins a series of 5 free webinars that focus on actions that can reduce your own carbon footprints. This webinar is going to focus on electric vehicles. Cars are part of our transportation system, which is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the US. But individuals today, we've got a chance to reduce our own contributions under this source category by purchasing an EV. This webinar was developed with the consumer in mind. We hope to provide you with the information that will help you decide when the time to purchase an EV is right for you. So tonight, our agenda is going to include Doug Oliver from Ford Motor Company EV, who's going to discuss the benefits and challenges to purchasing an EV. So beyond cost, what is it that we should be looking at in our quest to purchase an EV besides cost? Simi Barr of the Ann Arbor Office of Sustainability and Innovation will discuss how Ann Arbor is changing to accommodate EVs. Finally, we have 3 EV owners who will talk about what it is like to own an EV. That is, what are the benefits, what are the challenges from their perspective, from their experience. Sandy Simon, who is with the Unitarian Church of Ann Arbor, will moderate that session, and Sandy can make introductions of the speakers at that time. Don, you want to talk about our sponsoring partnership?
Yes, I would. Thanks, Bill. And thank you, Bill, for organizing this workshop and for hosting it. The Climate Hero Stories initiative was triggered by a single statistic and a single psychological principle. The single statistic is that 56% of people in Washtenaw County are never talking about climate change. And if people aren't talking about it, they're not going to take action to address it. The single psychological principle is people look to others who are similar to themselves for cues about appropriate behavior. Putting these together, we've created a process to identify and celebrate a local climate hero each month. Our September climate hero is Carol Sue Broadbeck with Zion Lutheran Church. We're also purchasing an ad every other month in the Ann Arbor Observer to celebrate these heroes. We're conducting these monthly webinars, and we have a website which is a central resource identifying local organizations and events. And perhaps most importantly, as Bill suggested, we have 7 faith-based organizations, congregations, who are co-sponsoring this initiative and using this initiative to engage their congregations in climate learning and action. Now, I've been asked, do these activities really make a difference, Don? After all, an ad in the Observer or webinar or the website don't really reduce the use of fossil fuels. So I answer that question with 3 points. Number 1, thoughts and beliefs precede behavior, and all of our activities impact thoughts and beliefs to provide people with the knowledge, confidence, inspiration, and motivation to take action. Number 2, we're providing a low barrier to getting involved. Reading about a climate hero or attending a webinar are simple behaviors which can provide an entry point to more significant personal action. And then finally, number 3, there is strength in numbers. By bringing together many prominent congregations and working together, we are loudly proclaiming that there's a groundswell of support for climate action. So I want to thank the sponsoring organizations for their support and thank each of you for being here. There's only one way to move the ball forward, and that's by working together. And Bill, I pass it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Don, and thank you to our sponsoring congregations. We will take a couple questions after each presentation, and then we'll move on. We'll have an open Q&A session at the end of the program after the EV owner session. And just as a commercial, our next webinar, the second one, is going to be on December 14th, and it addresses options for heating and cooling systems, as well as appliances that can reduce greenhouse emissions. And Kathy has put the link into the chat box for that. So you can sign up for that whenever. And with that, our first speaker is Doug Oliver, who's an electrical engineer with Ford Motor Company, with over 30 years of experience in electric vehicles, battery development, developing charging standardization, and software development. Doug?
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. I had to drop out of the WebEx brief or the Zoom call to get this thing to share my screen. Let's see if it'll let me do that.
We can hear you.
We see you.
Well, that's a good sign. Let's see if I share this screen. Okay, maybe that'll work. Right now, you might be seeing all the participants. But if I do this, let's see if this works here. Okay.
There you go.
Yep.
Are you able to see that? Okay. And it's the full screen?
Yes.
It is.
Cool. Technology. It's awesome. So, thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate being invited to participate in this event. I'm really just a regular guy who just made a decision some years ago to come and work for Ford, and then got interested in electric vehicles through the work that I do there. Now, I want to make that disclaimer right up front. I'm speaking about my experiences. I'm not speaking on behalf of Ford or representing Ford's views on any of what I say. These are what I have discovered as an individual just working with the electric vehicle and technology. And I'm just sort of a nerd, a geek, a kind of a techie kind of guy. So I like trying out new things. So this is my experience with electric vehicles. And, you know, as I said, I'm kind of passionate about electric vehicles and technology. Just ask my friends and family. Maybe I'm annoyingly so passionate. So my background was in the bio there. I've been working for Ford for quite a number of years, not quite 30 years, but getting close to that. Before that, I worked in companies that did laboratory photography equipment, some companies that did laser printer stuff, and then of course I've spent a big part of my career in the automotive industry here. Worked in software, worked in hardware development, so I know about both of those. I did things related to battery controls on the really old program, which I'll touch on in a minute. And I also participate in a lot of standardization efforts, such as SAE or ISO or IEEE. I have a few patents as well. So my experience with electric vehicles. I started working for Ford back in the mid 90s, and I worked on the 1998 Electric Ranger BEV. It was a program where Ford developed roughly 2,000 electric vehicles based off of their Ranger platform. It was a little bit smaller than the current product. And then there was a follow-on project that developed some postal vehicles based off of that same platform. So the same Grumman-shaped, Grumman-developed shaped postal vehicle that you normally see about was just put onto this rolling chassis to make a electric postal vehicle. Unfortunately, that didn't really take off. In the mid 2000s, early 2000s, I worked on a fuel cell electric vehicle project. It was a demonstration vehicle, which is basically a BEV, a battery electric vehicle, but it had a fuel cell range extender, which means it didn't burn fossil fuels. What it did is had this system that would use hydrogen to produce electricity, which would then recharge the batteries or extend the range of this vehicle to a normal range of what you'd expect a vehicle of that class and style to be. You get about 20 miles of range, and you'd refuel at hydrogen fueling stations. There isn't a lot of them. Many of them, more of them in California than elsewhere. And then finally, in 2013, I purchased my first battery electric vehicle for regular driving. It was a Ford Focus. And so those were available as a production vehicle through, I believe, 2018, when they stopped making those vehicles. And I used that as my daily driver. And when I first started driving that vehicle, public infrastructure charging locations around town were very rare. So I was charging mainly at home. And so I had a charging stand, a 240 volt charging station put in at my home. And then after some years of owning that, I was able to charge at work when the company installed charging stations in the workplace. So one of the questions that often gets asked is, okay, here's the progression of vehicles over a little more than a decade. How did the batteries change over that period of time? Well, if we look back, even back to the early 90s, lithium-ion batteries have really only improved in energy density about 2.5 times. So that being said, a 30-year-old car made back in the early 90s might get 100 miles, but a similar car built with the same, with the current lithium-ion technology might get only about 250 miles. And then even going back further, since 1970, battery tech, going back to lead acid batteries and other nickel metal batteries from those era, batteries have only improved about 5 times. So it's while it seems like there's a lot of progress there, it does seem slow in coming. But still, yeah, I have driven several electric vehicles, and my first electric vehicle, of course, was the Ranger BEV back in the late 90s. So after I bought my Focus, I went to other cars, which I'll talk about, but my son bought his own Focus that he was using. It was a 2016 Focus that we still have that, and my wife now drives that just because she would rather leave her gas consuming car in the garage and drive this battery electric with the price of gas these days. So my daily driver, I love it. It's a Ford Mach-E. I'm not trying to sell Ford, just saying this is a lovely car, really fun technology. I bought the standard range battery. I didn't think I needed extended range. I bought just rear wheel drive. I didn't get the performance or all that fancy stuff, but it's a delightful car. Over the years, I've also, well, one other thing about the Mach-E, unlike the Focuses that we had, the Mach-E supports fast charging, which is a kind of a game changer with electric vehicles. And I'll speak a little bit about that. Fast charging allows one to charge from say 20% up to 80 or 90% in about a half an hour time instead of overnight. The Focuses that we have basically would take about 4 hours to recharge that Focus, but each of the Focuses only had about 100 miles range. My Mach-E has about a 230 mile range, optimal conditions. But the fast charging makes it possible to do road trips, go a longer distance. And I have something at the end of my presentation about that. Over the years, I've also had a Fusion Energy, which is a plug-in hybrid. It allows you to go about 20 miles on electricity and then drive on using gas and electricity together as a hybrid. And I also drove a C-Max Energy. And over the years, I've kind of accumulated other battery things, right? I even have a lawn tractor that runs on batteries instead of a gasoline lawn tractor. So people often consider, I want to do something good, but they don't know, electric vehicles look expensive. Well, one has to consider the whole total cost of ownership. So I kind of think of as a vehicle as a tool. It's just a tool that lets me move from one place to another, and hopefully easily and conveniently and comfortably. So the total cost really isn't just the initial purchase price, nor is it the monthly payment. It really is everything else that goes into using that. And that's the cost of fuel, maintenance, and insurance, even government incentives and residual value. So while I talk about all that, I don't look at the CO2 emissions as much when I look at my vehicle, because I'm really looking at the things that are practical to me, which is the total cost of ownership. Because I'm a geek, an engineer, a nerd, I created a spreadsheet that lets me compare certain vehicles against each other. And I don't want you to have to read the whole contents of this slide, but essentially I've got several vehicles there that are gas and hybrid and fully electric. And then I compared the cost of those. And as it turned out, my calculations, by considering the cost of gas, the cost of electricity if you recharge it, the cost of how many miles one drives, the cost of insurance and cost of maintenance, it turns out that a hybrid that I lease instead of a hybrid, well, my son now leases, the hybrid actually is a cheaper vehicle to own over a course of 1 year, 5 years, and even 10 years out, if you continue to keep driving that same vehicle. So, some people ask me, when's the best time to buy an electric vehicle? Well, I can't say when the best time to buy is. Really, it's the same as looking at any other consumer item. When's the best time to buy a smartphone? Well, next year's model will be certainly better than this year's models. So one can say it's a tool, and if I need that tool now, I'd buy it now. That's really the best time to buy. Certainly, we see news stories about these lab experiments where somebody's got a new battery breakthrough or technology to recharge batteries more quickly, but those are lab experiments, and those don't come to into a vehicle production quickly. They take a long time to put into production, because you have to test it for safety. If this is something that somebody's going to sit inside and travel down the road at 70 miles an hour, it has to be really well developed. So another question people ask is the incentives. I talked about that, the government incentives. There was a tax incentive that was given for vehicle purchases that was, I can't remember when that was first introduced, but there's a new Inflation Reduction Act that just came out that extended those tax credits. Now, those are tax credits. They actually discount people's actual cost of their taxes. Now, the problem with what's in the new Reduction Act is it's really typical government lawmaking. It's very exceedingly complicated. Not all vehicles will qualify based on the price of the vehicles. Not all buyers will qualify due to income caps built into the law. The incentive is based on battery size and where those batteries are made. So whether that makes sense for someone or not really has to be studied with the vehicle that they might be considering. One great thing of the new Inflation Reduction Act was that used cars would qualify for a tax credit as well. So a second owner or possibly a third owner could get a benefit from buying one of those vehicles in the used market. Of course, the used market and the new market right now is really quite a difficult. It's quite expensive. Just to one other thing on my analysis, as you can see, I don't know if it can be read here, just the 5-year total cost of ownership of these vehicles approaches some $50,000. That's gas, insurance, the purchase price, and other factors. So, and then over the course of 10 years, one might spend $100,000 just having a newer model car to drive. Now, of course, one could get by with a very inexpensive car, but then the gas might use up all the savings that they had by buying an old, quite a bit older used car. So I'm going to move on from there. And charging. Well, that's really important for people that are really wanting to jump into electric vehicle use. So I charge at home most often, but I don't really charge to full very often. With my Mach-E, I basically charge maybe once a week because it just goes around town. I don't need any more charge than that, what I have. So it's, and when I charge, I just plug it in and it charges overnight. I don't have to do anything. I never stop at a gas station. Of course, that means I can't get a coffee or something in the morning if I'm going somewhere. And there are public stations around, so one can stop and charge at certain businesses and schools or at their workplace. So that'll be a way to put energy back into the car as well on their daily trips. Now, the utility companies offer varying rate plans. So some people ask, well, what does it do to my electric bill? Well, I'll get into that here. But the basic consensus is charge at night because that's when it's cheaper to get electricity and put it in the car. This is my electric bill. One can see that the typical electric bill has the gas and the electricity for use for the house. I have a interruptible air conditioner, but what we really want to talk about is this last portion. This is the portion I have a separate meter for my charging station that's in my garage, and that I'm going to zoom in on that. And so this is the actual bill that I pay for electric vehicles. Now keep in mind, I have two vehicles, a Ford Focus and a Mach-E that were using the same station to charge. So DTE has a way of making things exceedingly confusing. So this is their bill that they show me, and they show on-peak and off-peak. So the on-peak charges here, DTE claims is 18 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, yes. So the on-peak charge is, when they add them up, it's about 18 cents a kilowatt hour. Total up the whole bill there, it's about $16.50 for the electricity on peak. That's during daytime charging. At night, it's about 4 cents a kilowatt hour. That's correct. And it's about $10 for overnight charging. Comparing the two, you can see that for less charge, I spent more money and than I did for charging overnight. But that's not the whole cost. DTE, of course, has to make a little more money. And so they have distribution charges, which are almost equal or more than the costs above. So really what we're all concerned about is this, about $60 a month on my electric bill. Now compare that to when I was driving a gasoline only car. I was spending easily $120 or more. Well, that was how many years ago? Gas was a lot cheaper then. So I could easily spend well more than $60 a month in fuel costs driving a gasoline only car. So I'm basically spending $60 a month to drive basically on electricity for two cars in the family.
Oh, that's great.
Another question people ask is, okay, well, how do I, find where I would need to go? Of course, route planning, most cars now have built-in nav systems. There is one in the Mach-E, and there's one in most of the other electric vehicles. Even the old Focus, still, it has a navigation system that can help you find charging locations in that navigation system. There are apps that one can run on mobile phones, PlugShare and ABRP. I'm going to talk about that in a couple minutes, but basically in the electric vehicle, you can go into your nav system and say, I want to go to some location. You can enter it, type it in, or speak it, and it will try to route to that. And if you can't get there on the existing charge, it will recommend locations to charge. And that works. It does. I found it to be a little bit clunky, but it did do the job. But I refer people to look at other apps such as PlugShare. PlugShare is a crowdsourced tool that lets one find where charging locations are around where they're driving. And while it's because it's crowdsourced, the data sometimes can be of poorer quality. It's much like Google or Yelp reviews. Do you take the good with the bad? On this drawing here, you can see different colored icons. The green represents slow charging stations. Orange represents fast charging. And remember what I said, slow charging is 4 or 5 hours or more. So orange might be a half an hour or less. And gray is non-public locations. Those might be businesses that don't let them share that. And a wrench is one of those locations. It's not in service. So plug share, as you can see, there's a lot of locations over the US. Zooming in a bit, over Michigan, even in Michigan, there's quite a few stations, even in the Upper Peninsula and in Canada as well. So zooming in, you can filter and say, you know what, I really only want to look for the fast charge locations. So it'll show you just those. Or I want to show me all the free locations. As you can see, there's no free locations in the Upper Peninsula, but there's quite a few around in the Maine, Michigan and around. In addition, we can zoom into the area around Detroit area, Brighton area, and you can see quite a number of stations. As you keep zooming in further and further, you can see that it populates even more and more stations. There's just not enough room on the screen for all the little icons. And then we can then filter based on where, even further zoomed in, where locations that I might want to use are. And then I can select one of those locations and it will tell me more details about that. It's at the Walmart Supercenter. It's operated by Electrify America. And there's the phone numbers if you want to contact them. It shows you the location on the map. And then in even further, it might show you what's nearby, like restaurants or Walmart, of course, or whatnot. So real nice, useful app. You can put it on your mobile phone, do route planning before you take a trip. ABRP, a better route planner. This is another app that I found that was just took things to the next level. This tool lets one consider things like battery size. How big is your battery? What your initial charge level is, the terrain, including hills, and real-time weather, real-time traffic, as well as the weight of your passengers and cargo. It also lets you set layovers and waypoints, and you can select charging location, vendors, and the rate that charges. And just kind of as an example, I planned a quick route here. And the route goes from Detroit area up to basically Boyne Falls and Charlevoix. So then it planned out a route and it shows me the charging places where I need to stop. While there's more charging stations all over the state, it's only showing me the ones that I have to stop at. One for 7 minutes near, oops, sorry about that. One for 7 minutes here, and then another one for 50 minutes. Now there's a reason why it did that. Why only 7 minutes? Well, in the play-by-play, basically we start here. Well, I was only at 65% when I left my home, so I wasn't full. So I had to do a little bit of a charge before I got too far. So I went and, according to this, it charged for 7 minutes, got back on the road, drove for an hour and a half, and then arrived in Bay City, charged for another hour. At that time, one could go and have a lunch or something, and then another hour, almost 2 hours to finish the drive, ending up in Boyne Falls with 10% remaining. Along the way, you could do zoom in and look at what's going on at that charging station, how much it costs, whether there's something nearby like a restaurant or a hotel nearby. You could put that in there. And then also, as I said, it's very configurable. So you can you can say, I want to find a food and stay there for another hour or something in this app. So it's really a great planning tool. As I said, also the tool's configurable in terms of what you put your vehicle, it's starting state of charge, how big your battery is, whether you're using the real-time weather or seasonal weather. There's also things related to terrain. If you're going through mountains, it'll change the performance, whether the battery's new or old. And even you can add, the weight of your passenger or other cargo that's in the vehicle. And that will affect your overall range. So this will give you a really accurate, actually, it's somewhat conservative. I've used it a few times. So it plans out your whole route. And I used it when I took a trip to Asheville, North Carolina, and it was right on. In fact, it was a little bit conservative. And I arrived at each of my end charging locations with more than it predicted. So it was really quite amazing to see that it was calculating my whole route really well. And of course, it can be hooked into your navigation system of your vehicle and provide route directions in voice or with street names. So it'll be like a route navigation system in a vehicle, even if you don't have a display. So therein, I think that's all of what I was presenting. Again, I'm speaking about my own experience, and that doesn't necessarily represent Ford, although I'm most familiar with that. That, I guess that's all I have in my presentation. Time for questions, I guess.
Should I just ask or raise a hand?
Ellie.
Go ahead, Ellie.
Okay. Thank you, Doug. That's very informative. So much information. Thank you.
Sorry for being so fast.
Oh no, that you really filled in a lot in this half an hour. Thank you. A question is, what needs to change in the big picture legislation or what to make a full electric vehicle a better choice than a hybrid?
The infrastructure, that is, charges where we were looking at those charging locations all over, that really, sorry, the next page here, you can see there's a lot of markers on the map that show where charging locations are, but then when you look here at Michigan, and if I were to zoom out to the whole United States, just like cell phone coverage, the coverage of charging location is sparse in places maybe where you'd want a vacation. If you want to go up north for a holiday, there isn't a lot of places to go to charge a vehicle up there. So infrastructure really needs to be improved.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes. Does the fact that a vehicle is an electric vehicle affect the insurance you're paying for cars?
Surprisingly, when I changed from the C-Max, which was a plug-in hybrid, to the Mach-E, my insurance went down. I think it's more related to the size of the vehicle and how the insurance companies rate I guess the crashability or the star ratings of the vehicle more so than whether it runs on electricity or gasoline or some other fuel. I'm not an insurance actuary, so I don't know how they come up with those numbers, but I can say that it could be all over different prices. But it did go down for me when I changed vehicles and started driving the Mach-E. In spite of the Mach-E being what's called a Mustang, maybe considered a performance car, it was much lower. So
Thank you.
good question.
So it doesn't sound like they see it as more dangerous, and so your rates would have to be higher or more open to theft or less open to theft, those kind of factors. Have you heard any discussion about?
Yeah, again, I don't know how they calculate their tables.
Doug, can
Yep.
you go out of your screen? Because I
Sharing the
can't
screen,
see
yeah.
the people.
I'm
who-
sorry.
That's
Yeah, I
okay.
could stop sharing here. How does,
Yeah.
so let's see
Up
here.
near
How
the
do I-
top. Let's
uh,
see.
Let's see. Well, where's,
Should be
Oh,
something that
it
says.
says new
stop
share.
sharing.
Your screen sharing. How do I?
You hit,
There we
Uh,
go.
There you
somebody,
go.
there you go. Thanks
There-
for taking it over. I didn't know how to release that.
Doug, there are questions in chat.
right,
Uh,
okay.
okay.
Bob,
Okay. Thank you. So Doug, I just had a question on one of your early slides where you had the total cost of ownership.
Yeah.
And I was curious because I think you showed, I don't know if you can, well, you just stop sharing, but it looked like you had a slide that had the cost for the Mach-E over 5 years, I think less than like, I think it was an Escape hybrid, but then over 10 years, the Mach-E was more expensive. And so I was curious how it became more expensive, because my understanding is that over time, you know, the maintenance and the fuel costs are a lot less. And so it seems like the further you go out, the bigger the difference would be.
Yeah, one of the things that can change the equation is the cost of replacing the battery. So the maintenance will be lower, but at some point the battery in a electric vehicle will need to be replaced. It's say 7 to 10 years, and so that's where at 10 years I think I had a battery
Oh.
replacement going in there. And so battery replacement is much like, you know, basically changing out the whole engine and trans in a regular vehicle. Of course, we know that regular vehicles, and that's also an interesting question. Regular vehicles, we don't change out the engine and transmission even at 10 years or 200,000 miles in some cases.
Doug, we got to move on.
Yep.
Okay?
So that's why.
Thank you very much.
Super. I'm
We
glad to
will,
share.
we will come back to you during the big Q&A at the end. So we're going to move on. Our next speaker is Simi Barr, who's an energy analyst with the Ann Arbor Office of Sustainability and Innovation. Simi's focus has been on decarbonization of municipal operations, city fleet electrification, and public charging for electric vehicles. Simi?
Hi all, thanks for having me. Just want to confirm that you can see my screen right now.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So are we looking at something different now? The presenter view, or we still see full screen?
No, we see presenter view.
All right, let's just do it like this.
There you go.
So thanks so much for having me. Like Bill said, I'm Simi Barr, energy analyst in the Office of Sustainability. And I think it's great to follow after Doug, because a lot of what I have to say really plays into that. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak to you all about what we've got going on. So as far as EV work in Ann Arbor goes, a lot of it is rooted in our 820 carbon neutrality plan. So that's a living 10-year carbon neutrality plan that was passed in June of 2020. It really focuses on 7 broad strategies and 44 more specific actions to get us to community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030. It's a living document, which means it's malleable. We can iterate upon it. And this governance framework on the right really shows how that's possible. The 2 strategies in the carbon neutrality plan that really focus most on transportation are strategy 2 and strategy 4. So that's switching our appliances from fossil fuel burning, appliances and vehicles from fossil fuels to fossil fuels to electric, and reducing the miles we travel in our vehicle by at least 50%.
That's not what he says.
On the right here, we've got a image that shows sort of how the plan was distilled from information from peers, public input, and various expertise of staff and technical advisors, and then really distilled down to a 10-year plan. there's a lot more information about the plan on our website, and happy to direct that. So by switching our vehicles to electric, that in conjunction with strategy 1, powering the grid with clean and renewable energy, has the potential to drastically reduce the greenhouse gases that Bill talked about, coming from our transportation sector even earlier this evening. Even switching and using the grid mix that DTE is currently supplying us with, which is largely fossil fuel based, has been shown to have significant greenhouse gas reduction impacts, and that's because of the efficiency of electric vehicles overall. So just to start, I want to do a quick introduction to electric vehicles. They've been around for almost 200 years now. In the late 1800s, we had various types of drivetrains of vehicles. Electric was one of them, internal combustion was one, and steam was the third. And it was when crude oil was discovered largely in Texas that the gasoline supply greatly increased. Gas stations became much more predominant. That, along with the Model T, really led to internal combustion vehicles taking off. And it wasn't until the 1970s, with the global oil crisis, that alternative drivetrains like electric and hybrid vehicles really started to reemerge. Now, as we know, electric vehicles are really growing quite rapidly, with a lot of the major manufacturers pledging to either significantly or fully transition their product offerings to electric vehicles. So we can see here monthly plug-in vehicle sales, as well as year-over-year growth. And you can see just in the past 3 years how significant that growth amongst light vehicles has been. Doug mentioned a little bit about charging, and I think that's great to touch upon again. Often when I'm talking to people, charging is one of the things that's most confusing early on. So I just want to give you a quick representation of the distinction between the 3 levels of charging. There's level 1 charging, level 2 charging, and then DC fast charging, which Doug mentioned. It's also sometimes referred to as level 3 charging. Level 1 charging is going to be the slowest. You're getting approximately 5 miles of range per hour of charging. Often a level 1 charger will come with an electric vehicle that you purchase. Just like if you purchase a new cell phone, it might come with a charger. So that could plug into any outlet in your house, any 120 volt outlet. It's going to be this J1772 connector, which I believe we saw on Doug's resume a little earlier. He actually worked on this protocol, but this is a widely used connector plug type amongst all electric vehicles that are sold in North America. Level 2 charging is the most predominant. You're getting quicker charges, about 25 miles of range per hour of charging. These are going to be a 240 volt circuit, dedicated circuit, usually 40 amps or so. And it's going to use that same connector, though Teslas have their own proprietary connector. This is what Doug mentioned as having his garage, and a lot of people do the same. It just takes a little electrical work, basically the same electrical work that's needed to plug in an electric dryer or something like that. That's going to be the same level of electricity that's going into a level 2 charger. And then finally, we've got fast charging. The plug types are a little different for this. There are 3 different types, and these are going to be the fastest charges. So you can get 80% of a battery charge in just about half an hour. So the CCS and CHAdeMO connectors are the most common, other than the Tesla connector, which I mentioned is proprietary again. So if you pull up to a fast charger, often you'll see there are 2 dispensers on it. That's not because it can charge 2 vehicles simultaneously, but it's because it has both of those plug types connected there and available for charge. So going back to our carbon neutrality plan, these are strategies that are broken down within vehicle electrification within A20. So we've got EV readiness and EV readiness ordinance, electrification of buses, electric vehicle bulk buy programs, electrification of the city fleet and private fleets, and then expanding EV charging infrastructure. Some of these are underway, some of these are complete, and some of these have yet to come into fruition. But they're all to support what we see on the right, which is projected growth of EVs in the Ann Arbor area. And this is very similar to what we expect to see in other communities beyond Ann Arbor and nationwide. That translates into significant need for EV chargers. So basically what this is on the right shows those two scenarios we saw before and how that breaks down into public and public chargers in the Ann Arbor area. So we can see the largest blocks of these are workplace charging and public level 2 charging, with that small sliver at the bottom being DC fast charging. On the left, we have what's known as the charging, sort of a charging pyramid, and the level of the pyramid represents where the most charging is occurring. So we can see the base of the pyramid in green is single family and multifamily homes where people are charging where they live. So we know most charging is happening where people live. And then as we move up the pyramid, we're also moving higher in charge speed. So the very tip of the pyramid is going to be DC fast charging in public areas, retail spaces, that sort of thing. And in the middle, we got that workplace charging and fleets, which is going to be mostly level 2. In terms of public charging for the city, we in the last year and a half or so, we've installed 4 fast chargers at City Hall. So on the right, you see these are DC fast chargers. I mentioned the 2 plug ports on those. So you can see each one of these has 2 ports. We also installed 40 dual port chargers in 7 downtown garages. Those are level 2 chargers. And our areas of focus are really curbside our areas of focus are moving towards curbside charging in the right of way, which is hasn't been done a whole lot of. So it's more of a pilot at the moment. And then helping those multi-unit dwelling sites with charging. Residents of multi-unit dwellings often have less autonomy over their parking space. They may have property managers, HOA boards, that sort of thing that can make charging a more difficult task. So really, we're seeing that as an issue nationwide, and we're trying to do our best to support those that are going through the issues of trying to charge at multifamily sites. It's often easier for people in a single family home where they, can install the charger. It's much less fewer hurdles to jump over in some ways. We're planning for EV charging in Ann Arbor. This is publicly owned charging by mapping priority locations. We use various criteria for this, and we overlay different layers and then form sort of the heat map that gives us ideas of priority locations for charging. We can then go into those tracts, those areas, and look for various sites, be it city-owned sites like parks or things like park and rides, or even retail establishments or multi-unit dwellings that we can talk to about EV charging. The criteria we're looking at are an equity index, the Washtenaw County Equity Index, the location of current EV chargers, the density of multi-unit housing, and proximity to public transit. And then this is one example of what the output there looks like. As far as expanding the charging infrastructure, we're doing public level 2 charging in downtown garages, surface lots, and curbside, working on investigating charging in the right of way, trying to help with workplace charging for large employers, encouraging that, and also charging at park and ride locations. The challenges, like I mentioned, are largely multifamily residential. So if you're a resident of a multi-unit dwelling or are interested or know people who are, feel free to reach out to me or to pass on my information. I'm always talking to people in condo complexes and apartment complexes, co-ops, to try to work these issues out. There's no silver bullet solution because each site can be a little bit different. So it's really a work in progress to figure this all out. We're also doing a lot of work here in Ann Arbor on electrifying city vehicles. So we have a green fleet policy that's been in place for over 2 decades now. But just recently, in the last 4 years or so, it's turned to focus a lot more on vehicle electrification whenever possible. So we're looking ultimately at the greenhouse gas emissions from the fleet, as well as the fuel usage, fleet size, and EV percentage. At this point, in just the past 4 years or so, we've achieved 20% of the light fleet being battery electric vehicles, which I'm really proud of, but there's still a long way to go. So that's, and I can talk more about what vehicles we've electrified. There's also this case study that was put out by the Electrification Coalition about Ann Arbor and about how we've electrified some of our inspector vehicles. These are Chevy Bolts that are in the fleet. We've also got our first 2 battery electric heavy trucks on order to be received early next year. Those are refuse trucks from Peterbilt. And we've also got 8 battery electric vehicles in the police fleet. A few of those are Mach-E's, similar to the vehicle that Doug had shown us earlier. Also, about 50% of our patrol SUVs are hybrids, and we're seeing really significant fuel savings from those. Those aren't plug-in hybrids. Those are more traditional hybrid electric vehicles. Some of the challenges, so here's one of the Mach-E's that's marked in the upper right-hand corner. Some of the challenges to electrification are higher upfront costs. We've got domestic union-made preferences that limit the options. That's what that's feedback we've received from City Council at this point. There are market limitations for 4x4 pickup trucks and heavy-duty vehicles. We have a lot of those in the city, pickup trucks, a lot of vehicles that plow snow, and the fleet team is hesitant, rightly so, to electrify some of those vehicles during a heavy snow event. We might have all of the on the streets for 36 hours at a time, plus, and battery electric vehicles of that size just can't charge in a manner quick enough to really keep that duty cycle going. As far as the police fleet, we're limited to pursuing Michigan State Police pursuit rated vehicles. This year was the first time they tested a battery electric vehicle, the Michigan State Police. In the bottom right, you can see that vehicle. It was a Mach-E, and the current configuration of our squad cars just doesn't really quite fit with the Mach-E. So still got to wait for some of what's to come when it comes to electrification within that fleet. Here are some of the first couple of years of data we've seen. So we've had about a 15% reduction in emissions from our entire fleet through this as we've begun electrifying. Some of this is skewed because of low data amounts and COVID. We're still working on our more recent green fleets reports, and those will be shared publicly once they're available. Unfortunately, I'm not that's done outside of my department, so I'm waiting for that data and excited to see where we're at now. At the same time as our emissions are decreasing, we're also decreasing the overall fleet size, eliminating vehicles from the fleet when they're unnecessary or deemed redundant, and that percentage of electric vehicles in the fleet is rising. That percentage number is lower than it is now. I cited 20% earlier, but I'll also note that that's 20% of the light fleet. We've got about 400 vehicles, as you can see here, and about half of those are in the light fleet. The other half are heavy vehicles like trucks and construction equipment. In terms of charging these vehicles, we've got 28 dedicated fleet charging stations. Those are level 2 chargers that are only used for city vehicles. Those are focused at a few different charging locations throughout the city. And we're designing for and preparing for the high-powered charging stations at our service center for the larger vehicles. Finally, I wanted to mention the EV readiness ordinance that took a lot of public input and public support to get us to the point of having an electric vehicle readiness ordinance. So this was passed in January of 2021. It's part of the Unified Development Code, and it requires buildings that are new construction or major retrofits to install various levels of EV charging infrastructure. It's a lot cheaper to do this when construction is happening than to, rip a parking lot out and do it later on. Finally, I wanted to mention public transit and what's going on there. Right now, the RIDE, the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority, has worked with a major consulting firm on a propulsion study of alternative fuels to be used in the large buses. So that's hydrogen fuel cell and battery electric buses. And it's a 200-page report, but I encourage you to take a look at the executive summary or the video that's online if you're interested. There's a lot of good information there, and eliminating, transitioning to zero emissions vehicles for those buses has the potential to do some really good things, both in terms of air quality here and overall greenhouse gas implications. We're also, the RIDE also has plans to increase public transit services. So this plays into that decreasing overall vehicle miles traveled that I mentioned early on in my presentation. So there's information about the 2024 millage, which just passed, which in part supports the RIDE's long-range plan for services over the next couple decades. I am a recent member of the board, so I'm excited to play a part in some of the leadership of that organization, and our board meetings are public. You can join them online or in person at the Ann Arbor District Library downtown. Our next one is actually tomorrow night, so I encourage you to get involved if that's of interest. And finally, I just want to thank you for giving me the time. My email's here. I'm happy to chat with any of you about these topics. And I have some links that I'll share to resources I cited this evening. So with that, I'll take some questions or pass it on to the next speaker. Thank you all.
Can you get out of screen share?
Yeah.
Thank you. Great. Do we have any questions? We got time for about one. Bob Dinan. Bob, you got to.
Yep. So I'm wondering, Simi, if one thing that you've explored is the possibility of chargers in street lights, street lamps. I've seen some articles about that. I'm not sure if it's over in Europe or other cities in the US, but there seems to be some interest in that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Bob. I mentioned curbside charging. So
Okay.
street light is going to fall into that curbside. And that's something we're really interested in. Unfortunately, there are a lot of barriers to doing that currently. Many of the streetlights are owned by DTE, or they're on a circuit in which the metering is pretty difficult because they're metered as a street light. So if you start putting other equipment on there, DTE sort of isn't into that. But we are in conversations about potential pilots, and right now we are working on a pilot to put some utility pole mounted chargers curbside, and that's going to be in the sort of the Carytown neighborhood.
Wonderful. We need to move on. We now are going to receive some advice and information from some EV owners. Sandy, do you want to take over and start moderating?
Sure. My name is Sandy Simon, and I am a very happy electric vehicle owner and driver. But my role tonight is going to be to introduce you to three users with various experience with EVs that are going to give us some advice. Hopefully, maybe some of you who are planning to buy an EV or recent EV purchaser might get some tips from them. The participants are David Lewis, who is an architect and he's a member of the Temple Beth Emeth. Lisa Lemble, who describes herself as mostly retired from administration of Gretchen's House Child Development Center. And she's also a member of the First Unitarian Universalist congregation. And Carlene Colvin Garcia, who's the founder of a company called Clean Mobility Consultancy. And so we're going to ask all three of you to, in turn, share, what kind of an EV you drive, what your experiences have been with them that you think would be interesting to pass on to the people here. And again, we'll hold questions till all three people have spoken and we go to the general question and answer session. So David, would you like to unmute yourself and go first?
Sure. Again, my name is David Lewis. I own a 2014 Chevy Volt, which is actually a plug-in hybrid. I looked at buying a fully electric car and decided that the plug-in hybrid was actually better suited me because I do need to drive. Occasionally I go on long drives for work, like Indianapolis is a place I've been going this past year or so. Every few months I have to drive down there. And my Chevy Volt it's a 10 kilowatt battery. I get 40 miles per charge. When I don't go out of town, I basically never drive 40 miles in a day. My typical day is usually anywhere between 10 and 20 miles. So the 40-mile range is perfect. I really never use gas unless I need to go out of town. But it's nice when I do go out of town, I don't have to plan my trip based on, where I can charge my car and have to wait an hour or two to charge my car while I'm traveling. So in my mind, it's a very ideal kind of setup where if I do have to drive long distance, once the battery runs out, I just switch over, my car automatically switches over to the gasoline engine. And then I could just go to the gas station if I need more gas. But like I said, if I don't go out of town, which I normally don't, I think maybe once since I've owned my car, I've driven more than 40 miles just running errands and stuff. So it's very rare. One thing that people don't talk about, and I just wanted to mention here, is that the miles you get from your battery, there's a really big range difference between like a nice fall or spring day versus like the dead of winter. I get 4.5 miles per kilowatt when I'm not using my heater or air conditioner, and the temperatures is nice. However, in like the dead of winter, when it's very cold out and I got my heater on, I might get as little as like 2.5 miles per kilowatt. So it's a pretty extreme drop in how many miles I get out of my battery depending on the season. And I don't think that was something I ever really heard about before I bought my car. I just used my standard, 120 volt charger. I did not spend any money to do anything special. Well, I should take that back. I did spend maybe like $100 on an electrician I wanted a dedicated outlet. So in a perfect world, you'd have a dedicated outlet in your house for your charging. So I hired an electrician to set up a dedicated outlet, but it's just the 120 volt outlet. And I just plug in my car with the charger that came with it. And I plug it in every night. I probably could get away with plugging it in, every other night or every third night, but I just do it every night because every day I want to have a full charge. And then when I do travel, I always bring my charger with me. I do think the lack of charging stations is a downside right now. It's definitely just in the 6 years or so I've owned my car, it's gotten a lot better. But there are still times where I go to one of the Ann Arbor garages, at least the one by my office on 4th and William. More often than not, when I go there, all the charging stations are full. I think they may just added some more recently, and I haven't been there recently, but so even when you're in a place like Ann Arbor where there's a lot of charging stations, there's a lot of electric vehicles too. So sometimes it's hard to find an available one. And if you're traveling in, kind of a lot of parts outside of Ann Arbor, aren't a whole lot of charging stations. But I do bring my charger with me. And, it's like when I do drive to Indianapolis, there aren't very many charging stations down there, but almost every hotel has some exterior outlets near the parking lots. And I've never once had a hotel person tell me, when I ask them, it's okay if I plug my car in, they always say, yeah, sure, we don't care. So I just plug my car into whatever outlet I can find near the parking lot, and that's worked out just fine. And I love not using gasoline for when I am just going around town, and in that sense, it's great. Maintenance is, I think, as everyone probably knows, maintenance on an electric vehicle is less than a maintenance on a traditional engine. So from that standpoint, it's been, a great vehicle. I'm trying to think what else.
I hate to interrupt, but I think we probably should move on because we're getting low on time, so people can save up questions to
I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover.
Great, thank you so much. And Lisa, shall we move on to you now?
Hi. Okay, well, I'm going to actually just talk about a few things that came to mind while other people were talking. If you are thinking of buying an electric vehicle, my first piece of advice is do not believe most of what you read in news articles about them that are written by people who've never owned an electric vehicle. A recent example, I think it was a New York Times article where they interviewed a woman who lives in Ohio and her experience driving her daughter to school at Michigan State University. And she sounded all very positive in her comments, but the article made it sound like a disaster because she had a problem with not recognizing how much range she was going to have when she left home. And so she had to, go to some extraordinary lengths to get where she was going. Then somebody from Electrek, a website that deals with electric vehicles and other types of new energy, called the woman and said, "What is there more to the story?" And she said, "Yeah, there's a lot more to the story. And I'm not unhappy with my car. I love my car." And it turned out that she had a rooftop carrier and a bicycle carrier on her car, which are much more affect drag on any car. And whereas the New York Times article had concentrated on the fact that they had her daughter's belongings in the car and 3 people, like the weight would make a difference, and it really doesn't. So the person writing the article didn't know anything. They didn't tell the whole story. And it just put a real damper on the whole idea of buying a car for anybody reading that article. So don't always believe things. A good place to get information is on like Facebook pages that are groups of members who own vehicles. Like I'm a member of the Tesla Model 3 and Y Facebook group, and there's actually 3 or 4 of them in Michigan. And you can go there, you can become a member whether you own a car or not. You can ask questions. People love to share information. They'll answer any questions you have. That is a great benefit if you're trying to gather information. Other things, the other thing about, it seems like to me the difference in owning an electric car and a gas car is I feel like I'm living in the phone app age with my electric car. We've driven back and forth between Michigan and California 7 times in the last 18 months. That's a lot of cross-country driving. And I've found that I have to spend more time finding a hotel that will allow our dog at a reasonable charge than I do figuring out how we're going to charge our car. It's much less of an issue to deal with. But apps, when you look, oh, we're going to our next charger, it's in Santa Rosa, and an app will tell you what's around there, where you can eat and that type of thing. But there's also reviews by people who have checked in and said, oh, by the way, there's an 8 array charging, an 8 charger array, but one of them isn't working as of last week. And it's in an isolated place, or it's in a great place, or whatever. It's just like when you're looking for a restaurant. It's all very useful, and it's not the type of thing you necessarily find about gas stations, for instance. So, and the other thing I would say is that different EVs have a lot of different capabilities. People often have questions about buying a charger for their home. And I would say that most of them are, it doesn't really matter, except that if your car doesn't have the capability to do things like start your car charging when the rates are cheap, make sure you get a car charger that has that software, because that will save you a lot of time and money. And somebody just asked if I have a standard or long range. We bought our Tesla 3.5 years ago because it had a 300-mile range, and we knew we would want to be going across country. So that helped us make the decision, because there aren't very many electric cars with that type of range. One last thing I wanted to tell Simi Bar, if I'm really concerned about people who live in condos and apartment buildings as well. I live in a condo in Ann Arbor. We installed a curbside charger, which was maybe the first one in America. I really don't know, but it was fantastically expensive. We built it so that 2 cars could charge at a time, and it welcomed the world to charge at it if they want to. But the city charged us over $4,000 in fees to have the review done for it. They said, we're really in favor of this, but please pay us $4,000 and $150 a fee, $150 a year rental fee, and increase the insurance on your car and your home policy. And by the way, please spend $2,000 putting a sidewalk around it. That we had to completely remove the existing sidewalk and put in a new one. So cities can be very helpful if they want to be. But if you ever want anybody to try to build more charging in condo associations and places like that, there really does have to be more help just in getting out of the way from governments, in addition to letting people do things that are useful.
Thank you, Lisa. Interesting information, and we're going to need to move on. So, Carlene.
Hi. Yeah. So this was amazing. Lisa covered so much. David covered so much, and what I'm going to be focusing is going to be much abbreviated to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions. I, like David, have owned Chevy Volts. We started back in 2013. We purchased 2012 Volt, and then we went through the 2018 Volt that we picked up in 2019. And it was an adventure in figuring out how to, optimize the mileage and how to choose which kind of EV charging station that, is suitable for plugging in at a work location that's 50 miles away, and then bringing it back home and plugging it in. So one of the things that I'm just going to be talking about is mostly about EV charging. And like Lisa said, just it's best to align your EV charger, if you can, with whatever opportunity there is to charge during lower rate times. And so with what's available these days, the smart chargers are really worth the investment. But if you are actually going to be doing a lot of traveling and want to have some flexibility for plugging in to either a level 1 outlet, or if there is a 240 volt outlet available for you, there are portable dual charging cords available for purchase that are designed with the necessary safety features, to be in code compliance, and they meet the standards for EV charging. And I don't know how many of you out there are, like adventure travelers, or, and so you want to have your tools with you to be able to have some flexibility, or just as a backup, in case something occurs and there's the station you thought you were going to is not in service or something like that, or you're going to somebody's house who, says, hey, yeah, I've got a 240 volt charger or outlet here. That's something that is an option to take into consideration. But in general, tootling around town, as David was saying, it's more energy efficient for sure to drive on an electric platform than a petrol platform. The in-town mileage seems to be, the miles you can go farther on electric versus on a tank of gas when you're stopping and starting. Because of the design of the vehicles that has the regenerative braking, you're actually charging your vehicle with the slowdown aspect of it, which does not, at this point in time at least, exist with petroleum fueled vehicles. And it's just such a much nicer experience in driving an electric vehicle, as far as the responsiveness and just the smooth handling. And they're just an incredibly much funner platform to, at least in my experience, to drive. So I'm just going to leave it at that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. As mentioned before, I just so with Clean Mobility Consultancy, I'm here at your service to answer questions with regards to the installation of EV charging systems. I am personally taking on the challenge of supporting folks who do live in multi-unit dwellings, condos, apartments, to go through the process. And help. It's something that requires a tremendous amount of patience to get some charging systems installed where you live.
Thank you so much, Carlene and Lisa and David. And I think, Bill, were you gonna take over for the question and answer session? Oh, you are muted, Bill.
All right, let's focus a couple questions directly on our EV owners, and then we'll open it up to the bigger group, to the broader speakers. So who has questions for their EV owners?
Bob has had his hand raised for a while.
Okay, there you go, Bob.
Yeah, I have a new question. The other questions I had, Doug answered privately. I was wondering if any of the EV owners use solar cells to charge their chargers for their EV, or whether they depend upon fossil fuels to charge their EV chargers.
Well, yeah, I don't have any solar panels. I've got, I want some, but between my roof orientation and all the trees around my house, I'm not a good candidate. But even, you still are producing less emissions driving an electric vehicle charged by fossil fuel electric generation than you are driving a gasoline powered car.
Yeah, I haven't seen the analysis of that, David. So I assume that's true, but I haven't seen the analysis.
I heard even in West Virginia, where it's like 100% coal, all the power, it only then is it's even approaching kind of close to the emissions of a internal combustion engine.
Well, again, how much more expensive would it be to have solar power charging your EV charger? I mean, makes sense to have the whole system.
Oh yeah, I would do it if I had
Okay.
good roof, good solar access without cutting down trees. Everyone I've talked to tells me, oh, just cut down your trees and we'll install your solar panels for you.
I went through, just real quick, I went through a very challenging process, being in Ann Arbor, the city of trees, right? Just like David, experiencing limited solar exposure, even though you're very interested in having, producing renewable energy. Working with Homeland Solar, they were able to devise the appropriate kind of awning bracking so that I could install we got a 4.1 kilowatt array on the side of the house as an awning, and then a small corner of our roof. We were able to do that, and it was enough to offset the weekly work driving miles. So it felt good. It felt good. I mean, it wasn't like a direct, charging it while we're actually generating the electricity, but it was enough to offset as far as the kilowatt hours generated. It feels really great to have clean miles if you can do it.
David, you got
Unmute, David.
you're mute. You've got to shut off your mute.
Got
There
it.
you go.
We charge our Nissan Leaf in the garage every night on the 110 outlet that was put in there, like any other garage. Now we don't use it a whole lot, but we're able to drive around town and do all the things, take it home, plug it in, forget about it. It's charged in the morning. That's very nice. We wouldn't want to try to go on long trips with it. What I'm worried about is when they're going to come along and tell me I have to replace my gas furnace, my gas water heater, and my gas stove, all with electric. How much is that going to cost?
That's the next session, David, in 1 month.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, David. I can address that quickly because there are increased costs in some cases to electrifying home appliances like you're talking about, though some have surprisingly pay periods. There aren't any intentions to at this point to mandate retrofits or anything like that in Ann Arbor of gas appliances, though that is part of our carbon neutrality plan. It's really about incentivizing the switch to electric when most feasible. But sounds like there will be more discussion of that next week, so I don't want to take up too much more time.
I will say though that as I transition older gas burning items, like as I may have mentioned that I bought a riding tractor, or not a tractor, but a riding lawnmower that's electric instead of a gas one, to replace a 30-year-old gasoline riding lawnmower, just because it made sense. I bought it actually during the middle of the shutdown, and so they were having a super sale, and it's like, yeah, I'll just buy that. And it's worked out perfect for me. It's quiet, it's smooth, it just zero turning radius. It was the right thing to do at the time.
Great. Stephen.
Thank you. Some down-to-earth questions. When we're thinking about purchasing a car, we consider the purchase price and then frequency of maintenance. So when we consider the other two kinds of vehicles, a hybrid and electric, how do those compare to just a regular gasoline car on those two question items?
I can take that. So in my calculations, it's interesting. A hybrid is not as expensive as a full electric vehicle, but it gives you the benefit of increased range. My daughter drives a hybrid Escape, and she's easily getting 45 miles a gallon. And basically she goes to the fuel station once, maybe twice a month, where previously her previous car, she was going to the gas station twice a month or 3 times. So it was a lot more expensive.
See, I think that as a couple, we're going to initially experience the purchase price when we hit the dealer. And so I'm asking the simpler question about the ticket of the item when we get to the dealer, and then the raw frequency of maintenance.
So as I said, in my study, in that spreadsheet that I created, I looked at just what you're saying. So I looked at the cost of fuel and the cost of, in addition to the purchase price. So if the monthly payment was $300, but the cost of fuel was another $200, but then if I get a hybrid and the cost of fuel is only $100, then I can go to a car payment of $400 and still be at net no change in what I spend per month. So you can actually pay for a higher price per month on a car payment to get the benefit of paying less for gasoline that you put into it.
And the second question, the maintenance frequency.
Actually, that's an interesting question. I forgot to mention that during my presentation. We heard of studies where there were vehicles, hybrid vehicles, in New York
They
City.
basically agree that the Ford C-Max was the one to get.
Maybe, but in New York City, they had hybrid vehicles that were going 600,000 miles as taxis, and they didn't have to replace the batteries in them. So it is possible to get high mileage. Now that was with just strictly a hybrid vehicle. Plug-in, or rather battery electric vehicles, where you drain the battery all the way down to near zero, it's a different thing, and so the batteries do wear out more quickly. But in a straight hybrid vehicle, the batteries will last a really long time.
And there's less maintenance. You don't have to bring it in for oil change and all that stuff.
And brakes, you save on your brakes because it's not using the brakes as much, because it's using the electric motors to slow down the vehicle, and the brakes are very, very often underutilized.
Thank you.
Why do you say that there is no maintenance? Who said that? Somebody, David, because there is still a gasoline engine, right?
Well, for a plug-in hybrid or a regular hybrid, yeah, but I'm saying if you had a fully electric vehicle, there'd be a lot less maintenance. But even in my plug-in hybrid, the oil changes are so less frequent because my gasoline engine is not running very often.
Thank you.
Okay. Ken Hanwerger, you've got a question. Are you there? Doesn't look like it. Does anybody else have any questions for our speakers? Yes, Ellie.
Just a quick question. Do all EVs come with fast charger capability or not?
No, it's more of the later models, the more recent models, because actually fast charging was only developed back, well, it's now 8 years ago, but it takes a little time for it to get into production, after the standards are written.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions? No? Well, then let me go through my list of thank yous to all of our speakers: Doug Oliver, Simi Barr, Sandy Simon for moderating, Lisa Lembo, Kathy Marshall, and Don Levitt, who are my 2 colleagues who are here. Thank you very much for bringing this to fruition. It was I thought, a very informative program. We are adjourned if anybody, if there's nothing else that needs to be raised. Kathy, do you have anything?
No, just Yeah, thank you to all the speakers and all the
Yes, it was very well done.
Yeah, everybody did a great job, and come to our other workshops. We've got one a month from now until May on different topics related to reducing your carbon footprint. So I put the link for that in the chat at the Climate Heroes website. So we hope to see you at future workshops.
Great.
Thank you, Bill.
Take care.
Thank you, Bill, for hosting.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you,
Absolutely.
Sandy.
Thank you.
Yes. Sandy, you did a great job.
Yes, thank you, Sandy.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, David.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Have a good evening.
Yeah, we'll see you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.